The answer, my friends, is blowing in the wind, or maybe it is in the sunshine. But what is the question? It is clean energy. Hello and welcome. I'm Sadhika Tiwari, and you're watching Eco India. And in today's episode, we try to understand what are the opportunities and challenges that come with renewable energy. Several states across India are trying to expand their renewable energy capacity to cut down on fossil fuels. India's western state of Gujarat last year announced major plans to boost its solar and wind projects. It's pinning a lot of hope on a hybrid system that boasts huge potential. Our reporter got a lowdown of how it works.
Babra in Gujarat is a town of 25,000 people. It doesn't look unusual, but when the farmers head out to their fields in the morning, they now pass an imposing power plant. It's a hybrid solar and wind farm spanning 650 hectares of land. The plant produces clean electricity from wind and the sun at the same time. Gujarat offers ideal conditions for the hybrid system. Situated near the Tropic of Cancer and the Arabian Sea, it has plenty of wind and more than 300 days of sunshine a year. Power operators have long since discovered the region.
Why we choose these locations for wind solar hybrid projects? So this region, in terms of the elevation, in terms of the radiation, is better. So when you compare to other district in Gujarat, then we found a better elevation for WTG generation.
Hybrid systems offer a decisive advantage. By day, they utilize the energy of both the sun and the wind, and even when the sun goes down, they still generate power from the wind. India has so far commissioned hybrid plants with a capacity of 1.4 gigawatts. That's about the equivalent to 1.5 modern coal-fired power stations. And that volume is expected to increase more than sixfold by the end of next year. Experts believe the high investment costs linked to these plants will drop as major operators enter the market.
Ultimately, these large players, they will help to cut off the cost. Dependency on manufacturing will reduce, and they will also create the jobs also, and a kind of competitions will be created. So definitely these large players are required in order to make the system more affordable.
CleanMax is one such player. The company derives about a quarter of its revenues from hybrid solar wind plants. Its clean electricity is sold to industrial customers across Gujarat. The power plants are also an opportunity for the people of Babra. The company says it runs targeted campaigns to recruit workers from the local area.
Directly or indirectly, 200 or 300 people are currently involved in the CleanMax initiative. One can only imagine how many people will be employed once a project begins in full swing.
Around an hour and a half's drive from Babra is the city of Rajkot. Piyush Bagaria runs a small company here, manufacturing hybrid systems. But these systems are much smaller and designed to work independently of the central power grids. He tells us how it all began.
In my village of Durasiya, we used to have problems with electricity. We didn't have solar and would experience frequent power cuts. In 2010, when I was in grade 10, I made a wind turbine and installed it in my house. That's how I started this business. Now our power systems go to places that have no other source of electricity. They use our off-grid models.
His company has so far set up systems in schools, forests, tribal zones, and coastal areas. A typical system like these would cost between 5 and 6 lakh rupees, or around 6,600 euros.
Globally, there's only one option for storage, and that is batteries. Power can only be saved through a battery, but the battery cost is high. And so the hybrid model is expensive right now because of the battery.
Today, Piyush is visiting a client in a city suburb. Anand Sangparya runs his own business and has been testing the hybrid system on his roof for 2 months now. He was already using solar power before, But now his energy bills are just a quarter of what they were.
One drawback of solar energy was that it only provided power during the day. But because I am now using the solar and wind hybrid model, I get an uninterrupted supply 24 hours a day. That's a huge improvement.
Big name companies still dominate the market for wind solar hybrid systems. But Piyush Wagaria is betting on a future in which smaller firms like his can secure a niche to supply the technology for smaller scale use like households.
The government recently announced a policy for this sector. So now those in solar energy will also start manufacturing wind turbines. Many people are already preparing for it. The market right now has a lot of solar. But in about a year, it will be flooded with wind turbines too. There will be a lot of competition.
India is already the world's fourth largest producer of renewable energy, following China, the US, and Brazil. But it still generates most of its electricity by burning fossil fuels. The government has an ambitious plan. By 2050, it wants half of the electricity generated in the country to come from renewables. Experts say hybrid power plants that combine the forces of solar and wind could be key to achieving that goal.
Constructing more solar parks and wind farms is one thing, but plugging them into existing energy grids is a whole different thing. And that is because these energy grids were built way before the advent of clean energy or renewable energy. We wanted to understand how can these grids be adapted so we can access clean energy when we want it, where we want it.
When's the last time you plugged in your phone and it didn't charge? Well, depending on where you live, this might have never happened.
And we kind of take it for granted that most of the time electricity is coming out and your device works.
This is Kelly Sanders. She's an engineer who researches how energy systems evolve.
But what's going on behind the scenes is actually quite complex.
The electricity you use is only generated as you use it. And to get to you, it travels through an intricate network of wires, cables, and transformers called the grid. The grid is made up of the generators that create the electricity, like gas or nuclear power plants or wind turbines. The transmission lines that carry it to so-called substations, which transform it to a lower voltage, and the distribution lines that finally deliver it to homes and businesses.
So solar panels and wind turbines, they kind of have a mind of their own. So we can't quite control them as well as we can these dispatchable generators that we've had in the past.
Dispatchable means electricity sources we have available pretty much on demand, like coal or gas power plants.
You can kind of turn them up and turn them down according to how you want them to operate.
Solar and wind are the opposite of this, non-dispatchable. We need the sun to shine and the wind to blow for them to work, and this flakiness has changed the way our grids are managed.
I wouldn't say it's so much a problem, but it's a different challenge that we have compared to the years 20, 30 years back.
This is Tim Meyer-Jürgens, the COO of one of Germany's 4 grid operators. In Germany, more than 40% of electricity comes from renewable sources. It's supposed to reach 80% by 2030. So, what challenges does a high share of wind and solar throw up? Well, for one, they make you depend on the weather.
It's more difficult to exactly forecast what we can expect the next day.
We have fortunately gotten a lot better at this, but even the best forecast can't change the weather. The German word Dunkelflaute, dark doldrums, describes times when there's little sun and little wind, a grid operator's nightmare. And even on days with plenty of both, they might not be there exactly when they're needed.
The renewable energies, if you look at Germany, for example, are not always there where you have the load.
Germany produces most of its wind energy in the north, most of its solar energy in the south. There's currently no way to get large amounts of wind energy down south, where there's a lot of demand from industry, or much solar energy up north for that matter. It's a similar story in the US. Most wind energy is generated in the middle of the country, but more than 2/3 of the population live here, within 100 miles of the border. So that's where the demand is. Consequently, wind and solar are causing grid operators a whole lot of headaches. But what if they aren't the problem, but the grids? Historically, we've put power stations close to our cities and brought fuels like coal or gas or later uranium to them. The electricity usually didn't have to travel far. Solar and wind, on the other hand, have to be put where they're fuel, so sunshine and wind is most abundant. And utility companies aren't the only ones generating power. People are putting solar panels on their roofs, for example. Traditional consumers are turning into generators of electricity. Things have changed since the old days, but our grids haven't. They don't fit the energy system we're trying to build.
So we have to transport the electricity from where it's produced to where it's needed. So we have more transport of energy than we had in the past.
This means we have to better connect our grids. That's why grid operator TenneT is building Südlink, a 700-kilometer high-voltage transmission line connecting Germany's north to its south. When the sun doesn't shine in the south, it could get wind energy from the north. At least that's the idea.
Building out those transmission lines, those very, very large transmission lines, is really difficult. So you have property rights issues, you have issues over, people that are concerned about endangered species and environmental impacts. So building those projects take a really long time and they become really, really expensive.
The key part is to build storage into it, to supply energy when it's needed. To cover shorter periods, huge battery packs are already popping up more and more.
You basically charge the battery when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, and then you discharge it when those solar resources or wind resources wind down.
Some grids also store energy with pumped hydro. You use surplus electricity to pump water up a hill and let it run down through a turbine when you need it back. Both these solutions can only shift a few hours worth of energy though. For days or weeks, for example, to cover a Dunkelflaute, we need other solutions, like hydrogen. We can make it from renewable electricity and then burn it in power plants without any CO2 emissions.
That doesn't mean that we should burn hydrogen all the time, because it's not a very efficient way, but for certain situations we will still need it.
And then there's another part of the solution, which up until recently hadn't really been discussed.
We could be the opportunity. So you can increase generation to meet demand. You can also lower demand to kind of meet supply somewhere in the middle.
The vision is to build a technology-driven smart grid that gives operators a lot more information to flexibly balance supply and demand. If all this sounds incredibly challenging and expensive, well, that's because it is. This industry study calculated that to hit our net zero targets, grids worldwide need $1.1 trillion of investment every year until 2050. And that's excluding new solar panels and wind turbines. Changing the grid is a monumental task, but it's one we need to tackle if we're serious about quitting fossil fuels.
Because in the end, our grids are the backbone of the energy transition. So if we are not successful, the energy transition will not be successful. And for me, this is a race we must win, so there's no alternative.
Agriculture here in India has now become very difficult with extreme temperatures, erratic rainfall, and the changing climate. Despite all of this, the fruits and vegetables that the farmers manage to grow, 40% of them are spoiled because of several reasons, including lack of proper storage and the extreme heat of the sun. A cooperative in Andhra Pradesh has found a way to turn the culprit into an asset and come up with a solution that is good for their profits and for the planet.
For Sambi Reddy Vayuru and his wife, every day begins with a prayer. Farming is a business with a lot of ups and downs. So every little bit helps, especially now that he's been making some big changes on his farm.
I've been farming for 8 years now. And 6 years ago, I shifted to organic farming, without pesticides. But it's still not easy to convince consumers to pay the higher cost of organic produce.
That's also true here in the nearby city of Vijayawada. The markets are full of produce grown using conventional methods. Immediately after harvesting, farmers and dealers find themselves in a race against time, trying to sell the produce before it spoils. Hygiene during storage and transportation often falls by the wayside, and the farmers don't always get a fair price. Back at Sambi Reddy Vairu's farm, things are more relaxed. Today he's meeting with Kutumba Reddy Nerla. The two of them are leading the way to solve the problems that farmers here face.
The government started a scheme to promote farmer cooperatives, which are called farmer producing organizations, by offering subsidies to make farming more sustainable and profitable. So more than 200 of us came together and formed an FPO of our own. We're slowly changing how we farm and sell our produce.
An age-old method tells him when the banana fruit is ready to pick. A brief tug on the frond, and if the colorful flower falls off easily, the fruit is ready. After the crops are harvested, they're loaded onto this decades-old tractor. But instead of rushing to find a buyer, they bring the harvest just a few hundred meters away, to their new solar-powered cold room. Their farmer-producer organization allows them to get subsidies to finance upgrades like this cold room, which can be used by all the members.
Normally, we would store the harvest in warehouses, which often were not clean and where the temperature was not well controlled. Regular air-conditioned storage would have cost too much. But it saves us a lot of money. It uses a renewable resource, the sun, to generate power, so it's quite good.
Their produce is safely stored here, under the watchful eye of Sambi Reddy. He handles all the storage and processing for the farmers. The solar-powered cold room was developed by an Indian startup. Their goal was to reduce the amount of produce that spoils right at the farm itself. In southern India's hot and humid climate, produce spoils quickly unless it's stored in a cold room immediately after harvest.
4 of the cooperative's farmers have already started using the cold room regularly. They started by storing pulses here, as well as highly perishable crops like chilies and turmeric. The farmers who use the cold room are seeing their margins increase by up to 10 or 12%.
Now, Kutumba Reddy Nerla no longer has to rush to hire workers and sell the produce straight away. He can take his time and make sure his farmers get the best price. A cold room like theirs costs about 1.2 million rupees, or 13,000 euros. 3/4 of the cost was covered by government subsidies available to farmers who are investing in sustainable technologies. But here in southern India's Guntur region, the rainy season can make it hard to rely entirely on solar power.
In the monsoon season, when the sky is overcast for longer than a couple of days at a stretch, the batteries run out of power. While this is an issue during the long monsoons, we do have the option of plugging the cold room to the power grid.
Still, their experience with cold storage on the farm has been good. That's why the farmers have also set up a processing center to make packaged products from unsold inventory. If they can handle both storage and processing in-house, they can cut out brokers and middlemen and sell directly to consumers.
We're now buying produce straight from our farmers and can pay them 10 to 15% over the market rate. We hope to sell fresh and processed produce at our own supermarket soon.
Back at home, Sambi Reddy Vairu is experimenting with new fruit varieties. They're more perishable, but better storage, processing and distribution will help. And the organic produce will give his income a boost.
What if I told you that you don't have to wait for your utility to provide you green power? You can generate it yourself. And you don't even need to be a homeowner or have a roof to put a solar panel on. We try to figure out how this works even on a cloudy day in Berlin.
Solar power for your own household. That's the promise of so-called balcony solar plants. At home in Berlin, former sales manager Corinna Wieland is just about to have one installed. And she can't wait.
I'm so excited. It's been 2 years since I first started thinking about getting a system up and running.
Balcony solar plants work just like photovoltaic systems on a roof, but on a much smaller scale. They can be set up on a terrace, attached to a balcony railing, or in front of it, like here, with simple brackets. Engineer Robert Dietrich has installed about 100 of them.
Typically, a balcony system consists of 1 or 2 solar modules. These modules contain crystals that convert sunlight into direct current, or DC. This inverter then turns the DC into AC, which is the type of electrical current used in households. Then I simply insert this grounded plug into the socket, and the power is fed into my household. And that's how I can use my solar system to run a mixer or a kettle.
Corinna needs to consume her balcony-generated power fast. Any excess is fed into the public grid. The system is a money saver, according to experts at Germany's Federal Network Agency.
An average household with a comparatively large, well-positioned balcony system in a sunny spot facing south can generate 15% of its electricity consumption using the balcony system.
An appealing prospect. Some 400,000 households operate balcony systems across Germany. But observers believe the real number is double that. Although there's a fine, many people can't be bothered to register their balcony systems, which are gaining popularity across Europe. Critics argue the panels are unsightly and unsuitable for buildings with landmark status. They can damage a facade or even pose a safety hazard when not installed properly. 40 kilometers from Berlin, locals behind a push for a shift to renewable energy favor these decentralized systems.
The advantage is that you don't need to be a homeowner with your own large rooftop full of solar panels. You can use solar energy produced on a small balcony.
What I like is the aspect of freedom and basically having the opportunity to take care of the power consumption by myself.
In Berlin, Oliver Lang used to research solar cells as a physicist. Today he sells balcony systems. Most models are produced in China, he says. The cheapest cost around 150 euros. For consumers, that investment can pay off quickly.
Currently, if you do the assembly yourself, don't choose expensive brackets and opt for the cheapest balcony power plant model, so one of the Chinese models, which are definitely reliable products that will last several years. And if you're also at home a lot, so that you can make use of the power immediately, then in 3 to 4 years the system will have paid for itself.
But does the environment profit too? After all, it takes a lot of energy to produce photovoltaic panels. But it's worth it, because they harvest as much energy within the space of 2 years as the combined power needed to produce, transport and eventually dispose of the systems. And solar panels have generally proved to be durable.
Systems which are now 20 or 25 years old often still produce as much as 80 to 90% of their initial output.
Of course, panels this size do not have a sweeping impact on Germany's overall power use.
Even if we attached panels to all suitable balconies across the country, we'd still only manage to meet 1% or less of our overall energy needs.
First and foremost, balcony power plants serve their owners. Corinna is happy to be making a small contribution to the shift to renewables. Later, she will show off her own new power plant to curious neighbors. Now all she needs is the sun to come out.
It has been so interesting to learn so much about renewable energy and see so many unique models propping up. Have you seen any such innovations in clean energy around you? Do let us know. You can email us or reach out to me directly on my social media handles. I will see you next week. Until then, take care. Goodbye. Namaskar.